Hello, welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing Drive My Car. After the death of his wife, theater director Kafuku develops a friendship with his driver, Masaki Watari, while staging a production of Uncle Vanya. Ryusuke Hamaguchi's acclaimed film follows the pair as they grieve their past and seek human connection. So Matt, what did you think of Drive My Car?
So this was my first foray into a Hamaguchi film, and I gotta say, I'm impressed. I really did like this movie. Interestingly enough, parts of it I felt were too long. The movie is very slow paced. It doesn't seem like a lot is happening. It definitely is building to something, so there's something to look forward to. And you were talking to me about this earlier because that was my first impression coming out of the theater. And you had mentioned that this is kind of this director's MO, is that he wants to portray life as accurately as possible. And that's something I think I learned to appreciate more thinking and reflecting on the movie, which I find to be a very positive thing. Is that there's a lot of detail in this movie that comes together as the movie progresses, and especially at the end. It hits right at the end.
Yeah, so I watched his film Happy Hour, which this movie, Drive My Car, feels like a breeze compared to Happy Hour, which is 5.5 hours long. And does have like a bigger cast of characters, but he uses length in a really interesting way in both of these films, that he kind of forces you to sit with these characters in this very naturalistic setting. So you're kind of observing these characters and how they just go through the rhythms and beats of everyday life.
That was one of the aspects of this movie that I absolutely love the most, is this foray into people's psychology. And it's not very overtly doing that, but that's exactly the type of movie it is. It's kind of a character-driven piece.
Let's talk about how the movie is structured, which is kind of interesting, right? So everything you're talking about happens an hour into the movie, or like 45 minutes into the movie. So we revealed in our plot summary that his wife passes away. So the bulk of the film is him grieving his wife and doing this production of Uncle Vanya. But the first 40 minutes of the movie is his life with his wife, which is kind of interesting because you're lulled into one kind of movie. You think this is going to be a movie about, a marriage that maybe has gone south or perhaps gone stale, and an exploration of that. And then when his wife unexpectedly passes away about 40 minutes in, we still have 2 hours and 20 minutes left of the movie, and that's when the movie really shifts into a different gear. But that prologue segment is really interesting, just because it sets you up for one kind of movie and then brings you into another kind of movie.
Yeah, it's literally a 40-minute prologue that seems like a film. And then you realize after that 40 minutes, I checked my watch just to make sure. I was like, has it really been 2 hours already?
Yeah.
And then I was like, no, it hasn't. I'm like, oh, this is the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
This is like where it starts.
I think it's interesting too, because most of the time we see films about people grieving, we don't really get to meet the characters that they're grieving, maybe through flashbacks a little bit, but we get to spend a really good chunk of time with this person that he's grieving. Which I think is a nice touch, and I think helps us kind of see his psychology a lot easier. When he's upset towards the end of the film, or when his grief is really coming out in this kind of emotive way, we understand why, and we understand the person that he's talking about. We're not taking him at just his word. We saw this person for ourselves. I want to talk a little bit about the metatextual element of this. So they're adapting Uncle Vanya. And I've seen this go south in movies before, where they try to integrate a text of some sort and they're drawing parallels between the film and the text. You've seen that be really trite before, right? And you've seen that sometimes the film's writing isn't very good, so they're leaning on this other material to bring all of the philosophy. This film does it so well. And it does it well the whole time. There's a point at the end that we won't really spoil, where some of the scenes in Uncle Vanya really pay off and relate to the film in triumphant ways. But throughout the film, as we're learning about these people and as they're learning about each other, these scenes mirror that, and the Uncle Vanya play and the film almost become conflated in a really interesting way.
Yeah, and this was actually what I told you in the car. I was like, I have something that it was my absolute favorite thing about the film, and that was it. More particularly, as a watcher and a viewer, your relation to that text, how your connection to it evolves from the beginning of the film to the end, is one of the most absolute fantastic things about this movie, because you are experiencing this dialogue right from the beginning of the film. And then by the end of the film, it is like a complete 360, and you're just like, my mind was blown, because I was like, my relationship to the dialogue and what was being said in the play, how that evolved in my own mind, and ends up in the end, I thought was just, it weighed so heavily on me. And I think how that parallels the storylines with the characters in the film, separate from the text of the play, is that they kind of went through those experiences where the text means more to them as well.
Yes, I think you're right. So one of the techniques that he has as a director, the character has as a theater director, is to make people read these lines in a really bland way. And all the actors start getting really aggravated because they're like, I can't act. He wants me to read this as blandly as possible. So our feelings, and I think you were kind of saying this, our feelings towards those scenes progress as the characters' feelings progress towards those scenes. There's a scene or two at the end where the production is very closely mirroring what's going on in the film, and it really lands emotionally. It's like the emotional crux of the movie. But what's really interesting is those scenes we've seen acted out 3 or 4 times prior, and they didn't have the emotional potency then that they had at the end. So yeah, I'm completely with you. I could not believe how well they integrated this. And I've read other Chekhov plays. I've never read Uncle Vanya. And I was kind of thinking that I would like try to speed read it yesterday before I saw this film. And I didn't, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, actually. I'm kind of glad that I didn't know this text going into it, because I think it's all the more powerful.
So going from here, I want to talk a little bit about the acting, because the acting in this movie is freaking phenomenal. You have the play director, Kafuku, which is the main character of the story, and there's this reserved quality about him in which you could just tell there's all these things kind of buried under the surface. And he portrays this so well. And it's one of also the great things about his character in general, because you're learning about his personality, which influences his decisions in his life, things he chooses to say and not to say, and when to say them. There's this personality about him that he doesn't want to cause strife, which ends up hurting his relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And he portrays
That's a good
that.
observation.
He portrays that so well. And there's also this mute character that uses sign language to communicate, and I was automatically drawn to her. And I think one of the things about her is I sense something in her that all the other characters were lacking. There was like a realness and a deepness to her. And the first time she comes in, she basically has to act out a scene to get into the play. And this was, I thought, just a phenomenal scene, because you sense the weight or the life experience that allow her to create that performance. It was that moment in the movie where I felt emotionally invested for the first time. Like I felt a connection with a character that was deeper than what I was experiencing thus far. Of course, I got there with other characters as they progressed personally in the movie, but with her, I sensed it right off the bat, and I thought she was phenomenal.
Yeah, and there's a scene that you really like about halfway through, right? It's your favorite scene in the movie. I want to actually talk about some individual scenes. There's a scene that takes place in the backseat of the car towards the end of the movie that was like spine-tinglingly good in my mind. Just like the movie was leading to this moment, and you had 2.5 hours of build up to this emotional catharsis that was awesome.
And just to add on top of what you were saying, the way that conversation happens, and they don't actually say what needs to be said, but
yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
But they both know exactly what the other person is thinking, and they allude to it.
Yeah.
And the tension that's there in that scene, I thought it was just phenomenal. I just had to.
Yeah, and it's this scene between men that have this kind of emotional intimacy by being involved with the same person, let's put it that way, that is really interesting. And it's not shown a lot in films, I think, this kind of undercurrent of intimacy between two straight males, this kind of emotional thing that they share, that they're both grieving this person. So I love that scene. There's a scene, this is one of the negatives, I think, of the movie. There's not a whole lot of negatives, but there's a scene towards the end where they visit something from the driver's past. That's all I'll say. I think that scene feels a little trite to me at times. It's not a disaster, but I don't feel that scene nearly as deeply as the backseat scene.
What hit me with that scene is that it seemed very repetitive for the end, and I felt like it was just unnecessary, because what was expressed in that scene was done so much better in the following scene and said all the same things.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought it was kind of unnecessary.
So let's talk about the direction a little bit. I think this film is interestingly directed because it's not showily directed at all. Sometimes we think films are well directed when the camera is like being thrown around. There's all this crazy cinematography, right? This film is not showboaty at all. In fact, I think that this director is remarkably good at directing his actors and having a consistent sense of tone. Like, this whole film is at a simmer. There's this quiet little simmer, And it never really explodes, but it gets to, as the term I used before was emotional catharsis. It really does get to an emotional catharsis at the end of this. It takes a lot of control as a director to achieve that. So you ready to go to grades?
It's funny, we watched this movie about 4 or 5 hours ago, but since then the movie has grown on me in certain ways, especially kind of my realization, understanding of the characters, and the intention put behind a lot of the runtime and the scenes that played. And so I give this movie an A-. I really enjoyed this film. I love the intention in it. I love the characters. I can't get over my realization of my connection to the dialogue from the beginning to the end of the movie, and how my experience throughout the movie progressed and evolved as the experience of the characters with the dialogue from the play. That was an experience I've never had in film, and I really thankful that I did.
Yeah, I give it an A- as well. And I was thinking, I'm going to basically repeat everything you said, that I've liked this movie more since we've gotten out of it and since we've started talking about it. I think this has the potential for me to reflect further and this be even higher in my estimation, but I think it's a great film. So that's it for our review of Drive My Car, which is now in theaters. What did you think of Drive My Car? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you next time.